Good morning. I'm going to be talking to you all sort of about the costs of the cult of expertise this morning. And this is not going to be a super technical talk, so this is a really great chance for anybody who's trickled in to sneak out if you were looking for sort of very high-level technical things. We're mostly going to be looking at how in technology we value skill and how we value expertise, and whether or not we're doing a really good job of finding real skill within our communities, within our teams. We're able to sort of accurately judge our own skill sets. To give you a little bit of background on myself, I'm Jessica Rose. I'm American, but based in the UK now. And I'm actually a former teacher. Has anybody been to one of my talks before? Cool. I'm really sorry, but that as a former teacher, there's going to be a little bit of interactivity. I'm going to ask you to raise your hands sometimes, to shout sometimes. Everybody just look gently uncomfortable if you're okay with that. And just really quickly, who here is a native speaker of English? Just to get a cool. If I am going a little bit too fast, make that same gently uncomfortable face and I'll slow down. So just recently I was bad at slides. Just recently I started working with a company called Dream Factory, helping out to sort of do developer outreach for their open source projects. But before I got into that, I was doing quite a bit of work with non-traditional talent in technology. And I still do quite a bit of mentoring adult learners, and I'm still really, really interested in working with people who want to get into technology for the first time. And as part of that process, I would occasionally do some work with companies, consulting around them getting in the talent they needed. So what got me started on this topic and what got me thinking about it and writing this talk was with getting called into a company to help them try and fill a role. And they called me in and they were like, Jess, we're looking for somebody who's got 3 years of .NET experience. I was like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. 3 years of .NET experience is a fairly reasonable spec. That's not strange. But we want them to have 2 years with C#. Okay, that's quite specific, but those are skills I'd expect to see bundled together. That's not weird. We want them to be a really good graphic designer. Oh, okay, that's a thing. I kind of see what you're doing there, I guess. You're looking for someone with a diverse background, an interesting skill set, maybe a designer who's gone, okay, this is kind of narrowing things down. We want them to be really, really great at just sort of front-end stuff in general. And at this point, I'm sort of gently wiggling, a little bit uncomfortable. And you know what? We want all this other stuff too. I said, okay. Thinking of a really polite way to frame this. I was like, okay, so you're looking for a developer. No, we're looking for a junior developer. And I thought this was really interesting. So they were really, really interested in getting sort of more diverse team involved. They were really focused, and this is quite common, they were really focused on sort of getting a woman onto the team. I think mostly so they wouldn't get fussed at for not having a woman on the team. So they're like, we want all of this, but female talent as well. So I started humming and hawing gently for a bit and started talking around issues I see talked about quite a bit with job descriptions. And I was not super pleased with this. It was a little bit of an awkward pause. I was thinking, do you know what? I find that, and lots of people have written that, candidates of different genders opt in to job descriptions at different points. So Forbes last year wrote that men feel confident at their ability at around 60%. 30? Oh, the way you were just like, no, I'm on it, 30, I'm good.
Probably gentlemen.
And Forbes went on to say that women don't really feel confident with applying for things, putting themselves forward, until they meet all of the requirements. And I like to be really suspicious of things I want to believe. And for me, this quote felt really true. I've looked at a bunch of job descriptions where when I saw what they wanted me to do, I could do that. But when I saw the bullet points, I thought, I'm not a graphic designer. So I wanted to hunt this down and see where they got this information from. And this was actually looking at a Hewlett-Packard internal data dump that's saying, do you know what, when we were tracking internal applications for promotion, we found that men applied when they met 6 out of 10 of the description points. And women weren't putting themselves forward until they met all of the stated requirements or exceeded them by a fair amount. And I thought, that's weird and cool and screwed up. So I start gently talking around this, saying, do you know what, if you really want a female candidate, it's gonna be, maybe you should do this, maybe you should do that. No, they cut me right off. Well, actually, and you know how everyone loves to hear, well, actually. Actually, we've already had a female come in, we've already had a woman applicant. And I thought, oh wow, that's amazing. You've had a female applicant. Who was it? I said, oh, and this is a relatively medium-sized town in the UK. So I think the tech scene's small enough where many of us know each other. And I said, well, it was this woman who you've worked with in the past. This woman is the only person I could ever imagine, male, female, of any background, who has every single one of their stated requirements. It's insane. She's got a background as a graphic designer, really great developer, used to be in front end. And I was thrilled. I was like, that's amazing. How did you guys find her? Oh, she just applied. I said, okay, well, why are we having this conversation? I wasn't too put out because they had really nice tea and really nice biscuits, but it seemed like they had solved my problem before I came in. I said, well, you know, she's just really not fit for the role. We need somebody who's got, you know, higher level skills. And I thought that was interesting. She was one of the most accomplished developers I've worked with in a long time. And they said, no, you know what, we don't see her coming in to this role at this level. She was so far beyond a junior level that I was quite angry that she had applied for it. And absolutely filled with rage that these folks had brought her in for an interview and then gone, no, you know, this is not how we pictured the person that has these skill sets presenting themselves. So I choked down my quiet rage and went on my way, and they eventually went ahead and hired a young man who had just graduated from uni. And this got me thinking, what kind of skill were they looking for? Were they looking for the job that actually needed doing, which was front-end development? They didn't need any of the rest of the stack. Were they looking for the requirements on their list? Or were they looking for someone who is able to confidently present themselves as an expert? So who here feels like you're an expert in your field? Hey, really? Really? Who here would put yourself up for it as an expert in front of other people from your field? Y'all are not gonna like the rest of this presentation. I got to thinking quite a bit about how we define expertise, and I'd love to hear any of you yell at me, like, what do you think makes an expert in technology?
Someone with a lot of battle scars.
Maybe experience? Yeah. What else do we accept as sort of like proof of expertise in technology? Sorry, I know it's very early in the morning for people to be demanding questions.
Show me what you've shipped, show me what you've done. Tell me about your, experience.
So like actual production, what you've made.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other ways that people communicate experience? Just yell at me.
Yeah, I'm thinking in terms of reputation. If you find somebody who's been asked back to the same customer twice, that's a good sign.
Yeah, so sort of visibility within the industry as sort of very solid? Or just on the CV being asked back on contracts of the same type?
The reputation dimension.
Oh, okay.
Asking somebody else's opinion. So if you can get hired once, but if you get hired twice by the same person, that's usually a good sign.
Oh, that's quite nice. I've given this talk a couple times and hadn't heard that before and quite like it. Anything else? So far we're looking at really solid things. Are there any sort of more gently fluffy ways to become an expert?
Presenting at conferences.
Yes! I will personally attest that this is a really great way to get yourself taken as an expert for a lot of things you might not necessarily do. If you are visible either through speaking or through sort of online spaces or social media, People will read expertise into the context. I've been offered a job writing PHP production code. You should not offer me a job doing PHP. JavaScript jobs, and once a French teaching role. And I don't speak French. So hands up, who here works for a company that's currently hiring? Cool, who, keep them up for a second? Sorry, I know. Whose company's been hiring for the same role for more than 3 weeks? More than 3 months? More than 6 months? More than a year? What roles are these?
A junior full stack developer with 10 years of experience.
Do they need a graphic design background? Because
Most likely.
Yeah. I think that we've got a really, really interesting situation in technology where there's such an incredible amount of demand that I find it quite frustrating that we're not able to better identify skill within the context of what we actually need. And that sounds like I'm being very critical. That sounds like I'm saying, we're so blind, we can't fill the role based on our actual needs. But I think a lot of times things like visibility and things like putting yourself forward as an expert or having really good network connections stands in for expertise. I think we're looking at two problems and we're taking one as proof of the other. So I think that we put a lot of emphasis on expertise because I don't think technologists are lazy. I think humans are lazy. And I think as humans, technologists are a little bit lazy. We really like to see things communicated in a way that feels true to us. If someone is known as an expert, if someone's communicating in a way that we're familiar with, we're a lot more comfortable taking them at face value. The way humans form relationships is we tend to look for ourselves in others. So when we look to form friendships, when we look to form networks, we form these circles of people who are very much like us. So when we look to what it is to be an expert, we take our cues from those networks and tend to look for people who sound like us, whose success story is familiar to us, and who present themselves in very, very similar ways. So when we talked about women only putting themselves forward after they've gotten 60% or 100% of the job descriptions, I think that's a really interesting indictment sort of everyone involved. I think it's really, really interesting that we're writing job descriptions knowing on some level that we're only looking for 60% of that. And on the other hand, for women in the industry, I think it's really, really interesting that we're not better addressing the fact that we're speaking two different languages. I'd really like to see technology better accommodate different examples of skill, different demonstrations, but at the same time, have a more honest conversation about what we're looking for. Self-promotion is absolutely a skill. It's a thing. It's a skill that might be entirely separate to what you're hiring for. If you're hiring someone who needs to go talk to clients, if you're hiring somebody who needs to give conference talks, if you're hiring a name to attach to your project, self-promotion could absolutely be the skill you need. If you're not looking for someone to bring their name and their personality into the dynamic, have a think about whether or not the most visible name is the most skilled person for the job. I know in technology we've got a couple people who are just sort of bright and shining stars. And it's really easy to say, oh my God, you got such and such in for an interview? Yeah. But taking a moment to ask whether or not that person with the skill of self-promotion, the skill of looking amazing, and the potential that make your company look amazing, whether or not they're ready to do the thing you actually need done. I don't think it's all bluster and bravado. I think that self-promotion's a skill, and I think self-promotion's a really important skill. But who here has worked with somebody who absolutely thought they were the best person for the job, and they were absolutely not? You can raise your hand a little bit, you can look timid. My favorite cognitive bias is the Dunning-Kruger effect. Does anybody know about this? I love this. So in America, back in the 60s, two gentlemen who were researchers at Cornell were reading the newspaper and saw that a bank robber, a gentleman, had covered his face with lemon juice. So has anybody ever used lemon juice as invisible ink? This man had covered his face with lemon juice and then robbed a bank, later explaining that he thought it would make it so that the video cameras wouldn't capture him. And being scientists, these two gentlemen, Dunning and Kruger, got really excited. And they turned to each other and said, hey, do you think stupid people know they're stupid? And went ahead and did a little bit. I'm not saying people who absolutely think that they're the best are stupid. I'm saying that I have this data set. So they took about 2,500 participants and gave them a fairly wide-spanning aptitude test. So they gave them a test looking at their cognitive ability. And before telling each individual their results, they asked people to plot themselves on a graph, how they thought they did relative to their peers. And unfortunately, this is what graphs looked like back in the 60s. And they found that the people with the lowest test scores, the lowest quartile, rated themselves artificially high. So the people who were the least actually skilled had the highest perception of their own worth. And it's not a satisfying inverse X, but you've got a little bit of an inverse X going on, where the more skilled you are, the more likely you are to artificially devalue your own worth relative to your peers. If you have someone who's absolutely telling you they are the best in X, they are the best X you can possibly get, check to see if they're bluffing, because if they're not, there might be other issues. So just really quickly, I wanted to touch on teams and expertise. I think this is one of the most important parts of looking for actual skill versus the presentation of experts. So who's worked with somebody, one more time, who thought they were amazing but wasn't? How did this impact your day-to-day work? Was it awesome? Who left a role, in part because of that, in part of working with someone who was artificially valued and crap? Yeah. If you're in a position to hire, or if you're in a position to be writing job descriptions, have a conversation about what you actually need. There's so much learning that happens on the job. I'm not saying that everyone has to turn their role into a learning experience for junior folks coming on board. But if you need somebody to take care of your databases, I'm going to be really confused if I see you talking about graphic design. Don't demand graphic design anyway. One thing that I find quite frustrating for everyone involved is that skilled, non-traditional talent is often overlooked. So we say again and again that the only difficult things now are hiring and naming. Yeah? Often I hear people in technology say the only two difficult things that remain are hiring and naming. And talking about hiring is quite frustrating. I work with a lot of non-traditional talent who has a really, really difficult time getting into work because the way they present themselves and the way they talk about their background is very, very different than what people expect. And I'm going to say something that's really, really not politically correct, and I love this. So anybody who's been concerned about turnover in a role? So technology, with the high demand, it's really, really hard to keep people in the same role. If you look at statistical analysis of folks leaving jobs in technology, if you want someone who's going to be in the same role or within the same company in 3 years, hire a technologist who's a single mother. You will absolutely get people staying in roles quite a bit longer based on different career patterns. And if you find that women stay on average twice as long in the same role, absent culture issues, and women with children tend to stay in the same role even longer. I'm right now working with a woman who's absolutely brilliant and who I love, who's a computer science graduate. She's got an incredible portfolio. She's almost obnoxiously motivated. And this fills me with rage. I have to continually tell her that she can't work for free. Computer science background, has a degree, hasn't been able to find work in 6 or 7 months in a fairly competitive market. She presents herself in very deferential tones, very polite tones, and is coming from a culture where bigging yourself up is a bit less popular. So where I, or you maybe, going into a job role would be like, yeah, I'm great at this and I'm awesome at that. This woman who does have the skills and has the portfolio has a cultural script where she'll say, oh, do you know what? I worked on this, but really my team members were the real stars there. They did such a good job. And talking about things where she's like, oh, you know, I've done this a bit, but I'd quite like a little bit more support here. So by demonstrating that she's going to play well with others and be an incredible team member and not hog talent, she's managing to present herself in a way that it's almost impossible for most employers to see her expertise as skill. Even if you hire well, even if you get great people in, if you're not accurately looking for and well valuing the expertise currently on your team, they're gonna leave. Who here's left a role because you weren't properly appreciated in it? I'm sorry. It happens all the time. Turnover is massive. I think often when we're looking to hire, we forget how expensive it is. It's so much easier and so much cheaper and so much less painful to spend the time looking for the talent that exists on your team. The loudest person is not always the person getting your work done. It's not just about hard tech skills. One of the things I also find and I feel like I'm just fussing at you all about things that frustrate me. Traditionally undervalued skills, often soft skills, are one of the big things that are often devalued and often count against someone in industry and are absolutely vital to getting your team working well, your product getting out. So who here, out of the people who are hiring, whose roles specifically mention any soft skills in the job listings? 4 or 5 out of 30? Have a think about that. Unless you're working with a developer off-site who's not going to be ever talking to anyone else and contributing code that only they work on, you're probably going to want some communication skills.
In that scenario, actually, communication skills are twice as important.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No. I was always just like, unless they're never having anything to do with other people. If you're building your own thing, you don't have to be good at people. You should probably still be good at people. So I'm really, really big into the practical. I'll complain and fuss and, oh, we should do a bit better at this, but let's fix it. Early in the hiring process, if you can bring on low bias or bias-free processes, it's a really, really good way to sort of artificially rejig your hiring process. I don't work for these folks, I don't get any money from them, but highly recommend Gap Jumpers. Is a company that does sort of bias-free hiring where you set a test and they go out and source candidates for and have them take the test. And you never see who your candidates are until after you've selected them for interview. And it's really interesting. So I think they get a lot of folks who don't have tech school backgrounds. They've got a lot of folks who aren't coming out of top universities who absolutely ace the tests based on their skill alone. And I think they talk about underrepresented people being hungrier and being willing to work harder. So they don't promise underrepresented candidates, they promise you the best candidates based on the test you work on together. You were nice enough to touch on, I think a couple of you were nice enough to touch on showing you the product, showing you what people have done. It's really easy, especially when a team seems to be working well, to say, hey, this is all getting done. You know what, this person seems to be doing quite a bit. I'm going to be rewarding them for what they're doing. Actually looking at who's committing what, who's taking care of what, and looking at what kind of things are getting done outside of just the technical processes. Who's following up emails, who's fixing things, who's not breaking things in the first place. Like, look at what people are actually doing, not just the team dynamics that are getting things done. Test for the skills you actually need. So if you're bringing people in for interviews, test for some kind of communication skill. test for some kind of ability to work well with others. I am the biggest cheerleader for pair programming in interviews. It's an amazing way to see whether or not somebody's going to rage out day to day. If you can get someone pair programming on a technology they're not currently using, it's a really great way, well, it's a slightly unkind way to stress test someone. In a perfect scenario, I love getting people to pair program with juniors or interns. If someone's not nice, they're going to be very quickly inclined to be not nice with someone they perceive themselves as ranking above. It sounds like a really, really basic thing to be nice in an interview. But a lot of people can't get through a pair programming project with an intern or with a newbie for more than 20 minutes without snapping at them. I look for language like saying, just blank the blank is bad communication, not helpful. Or language like, oh, you don't know how to this? You don't know how to that? It's an amazing way to see what kind of actual code they can produce under pressure when they don't know what they're doing. It's an amazing way to see whether or not they're willing to communicate with and ask questions of somebody that has a generally lower skill set. And it's an amazing way to sort of stress test for jerks. So you're not a company, you're you. I want to talk about what accurate skill measurement means for individuals within the industry. So I was a teacher, I mentioned before I got into technology, and I was actually a language teacher. And I'm really, really into the zone of proximal development. And we talked about Dunning-Kruger and how people are really bad at gauging their own skill level. And that's cool, that's just a person thing. The zone of proximal development is a linguistics concept that if you're doing things that are too far below your current skill level in learning a language, you're not doing anything useful. So if you've been doing the same technical processes for years and years and years, you're not learning anything new as an individual by staying in there. At the same time, if you're working on things that are too high above your skill level, you're not doing meaningful learning. So if you're a language learner or a technologist, if you're working on things that are too high level, too above you, there's no space for you to understand, synthesize that, and move forward. The zone of proximal development is something like a sweet spot for learning. It's the space your brain really wants to be in to get better at things. I think unless you're having your skills properly recognized, unless you're having your skills properly rewarded, you're not going to be encouraged to get yourself in the sweet spot to continually improve. If people are keeping you too far below where you need to be, not only are you not being rewarded properly, which is a completely different and raging story, but you're not learning, you're not adding value to yourself or your company. I think it's really easy to say, oh, such and such got what they deserve. And people talk about entitlement in technology quite a bit. I really want to champion entitlement. If you are not getting what you deserve in the best possible way, you're going to leave. I think 10, 12 of you raised your hands to say, you know what, I've left a role because I was not accurately being rewarded. I wasn't being recognized for what I did. I think that's really, really important. The idea that unless you are getting what you deserve in the best possible way, nobody's really winning. How to fix this as an individual? If you're an individual and you're not being properly rewarded, you can look at trying to develop self-promotion as a skill. Who's really interested in getting better at self-promotion? Oh, cool. Oh, lots of people. Usually people are just like, no. Okay, you have some options. So you can get better at visibility, you can work to build your networks. If you think building out your self-promotion is a really, really good way to spend your time, absolutely do that. Other people are writing tutorials, other people are giving conference talks. It's highly recommended. If you think that self-promotion is the route you want to go down, it's a really incredible way to get yourself a little bit more of what you deserve. And if you're great at self-promotion, it's a great way to get yourself a little bit more than what you deserve. We talked about how on your teams that if you're not properly rewarding your people, they're going to go. I'm sorry, but if you don't feel like self-promoting, and you shouldn't feel obligated to self-promote, and if you don't feel like your current role is going to treat you right, go. There's an incredible amount of demand out there. If your company is not learning valuable lessons about valuing their talent, continue to teach them object lessons by leaving. I'm such a community nerd. I love people and the way people interact. And I love that technology is a whole weird, complicated intersection of different communities and projects. So I just wanted to touch on really fast how communities, and especially open source communities or open source projects, are really impacted by looking at expertise versus skill. I really strongly think that our communities need to better serve a diverse range of talent. And I think this not just because I want to see a diverse range of talent better represented, it's because I want to see these communities continuing to exist in 10 years. When I look at language communities or open source projects, the ones I feel the most confident getting involved with are the ones that look like they're still going to be around. Sort of the big tent projects, the big tent communities. If your community is not accurately looking at who's doing the work, who's making the thing, and leaving it as open as possible, you're really guaranteeing that your community is going to get smaller and smaller and die. This is a little bit difficult. I think that humans in general, but technologists especially, we love heroes. So who's involved in an open source community? Oh, a few. Who's involved in like a language community? Like you're really, really, really into Ruby or you're really, really into Python? Oh, there's only a couple of you. Cool.
Yeah, they're in the other talks.
I know. Sorry. I think within developer communities, you see people again and again build heroes. And the heroes we really, really like to touch base on are not necessarily the folks who are the most skilled or the most valuable. So in the wider technology communities, we tend to look to the Zuckerbergs, the people who's made the big money and made the things that got sold again and again and again. And that's great, but I don't think that confusing financial success for skill is always going to be a good idea. I think when we're failing to hold up the heroes that are building beautiful, useful things, that we're telling them that we don't value them. Unrewarded talent in your company will leave. If you're being unrewarded, get out. But if you're building something, if you're building a community, if you're building a user base, if you're building sort of a community around a product or an idea or a service, if you're not accurately seeking out, and if you're not well rewarding the people who've helped make that in a real way, they're gonna leave. And that can be people contributing to your project, that can be people helping you build it, and that can be your consumers. I think spotlighting actual visible talent, actual real skill is an incredible way to build, and it sounds very much like marketing talk, but build a very authentic bridge to other people who feel that they may be unrewarded, they may be unrecognized. How do you fix that? How do you fix communities, big nebulous pools of people all doing their own thing at the same time? Be suspicious of experts. If I'm coming up here and talking to you about skill in technology, be gently suspicious. I've got a microphone, but I might not know what I'm talking about. If somebody's coming to you and selling yourself as the most knowledgeable something something, be a little suspicious. Why are they telling you? Why don't you already know? Why aren't they showing you? It's so easy to be critical. With online communications, I spend about 20% of my typing smack-talking Ryanair. Take a little bit of time if you're a member of a community or looking to build a community around your product or services. Take some time to spotlight people who are doing things that are really meaningful. I don't work for them, I've never worked for them. I once said something nice about the hosting company, A Small Orange, and they sent me an email saying they really appreciated it, and then sent me a t-shirt. I will never pass up an opportunity to say that A Small Orange are the nicest people. It's so easy to spotlight real interactions or real skill around your projects. Taking a very, very small amount of time or a very, very small investment to make people feel more connected in a meaningful way is an amazing way to build your community. Cool, thank you very much. Okay. Does anybody have any questions or more importantly comments? Sorry. I'd be really interested in hearing about experiences some of you have had around being bad at computers. Please.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about this inadequate self-perception that you showed the graph from the 60s or
Yeah.
How has that evolved in time? Do we nowadays see our self-image, is it more accurate or is it less accurate?
So this is something I'm super, super interested in. Like, our brains don't really do us any favors. And there's something called the, I can't remember the name of it, there's a false perception that comes from social media now. So now, instead of measuring yourself against your peers' perceived skill, you've got data points coming in. So when you're looking at real-time data points from your peers, people talking on Facebook or Twitter, talking about their accomplishments on LinkedIn, you're able to compare yourself not to what you think they're doing, but you're able to compare yourself to a very carefully curated data set of their best moments. So now, instead of comparing yourself to, oh, Jim down the way, you've got a live feed of awesome things that Jim has done. So I think it makes people devalue their own skills a little bit more. I'm on social media all the time. I talk about great things I'm doing. I never talk about that time I ate a cupcake out of my handbag on the bus. Like, you never see people at their worst, and I think it's really tempting to use that to further fuel feelings of inadequacy. So did anybody else have any questions or things to chat about? Sorry, open-ended things are nice and terrifying. Please.
Thank you. When we talk about projects, we have been sitting together probably in the same room with business, someone from the technical perspective as well. What frustrates me personally is that when you see the big picture, right, and the other person does not. But yeah, there is a pitching going on, and probably I'm not the best in pitching except promotion, as you said. How to make them see that what they're thinking probably is about today, but after a couple of days that will be obsolete and then they will be probably out of business. Probably they're big shots. They could be the chairman of the board, they could be the CEO, and sometimes they have the authority to say no to you.
Yeah.
And that makes it more harder. How do you personally feel that what we should do to make them see the big picture, to have a big vision instead of narrowing everything?
I think that often when people try and give advice, we're just giving little snapshots of our own backgrounds and our own biases. As a teacher, I really like sort of really difficult having to lead someone to a conclusion, which I think is what you're talking about, where they're seeing a really small piece of it, and you're going to have to, especially working around potentially large egos, you're going to have to lead them to sharing your larger vision without telling them. And that's really challenging. I quite like to give people questions and give them small pieces of information and ask them to incorporate that into their vision and tell you again. So they're saying, do you know what, we only want to do X. And you say, okay. Instead of saying, what about Y and Z? Say, well, okay, X. We're looking at this happening in the next 6 months. I think X looks really interesting. Can we talk about how we might integrate these things? How could we future-proof X? People really like having their own ideas win. If you can let people make their ideas yours, it's going to create an environment where you're not always getting rewarded for being amazing, but you're not going to have to go back in 6 weeks and be like, look, I told you this thing. Sorry if that's not super helpful.
No, it's just that my personal experience is that when you're going to this kind of meeting and you have a technical background, so no matter what you're saying, automatically it becomes too technical for them to understand. Oh, this is too technical for us. Actually, it's not. It's probably, I'm not talking about the pure business perspective, but I'm not talking too technical things as well.
Like-
It creates a
Yeah.
invisible wall straight away.
Like, get them to speak first and try and mirror as much of their language as possible. Sorry, it's a linguistic nerd's answer. We really, really like to hear people who sound like us as well. And if you're really, really carefully highlighting what they say that you think sounds amazing, so you say, hey, do you know what? You mentioned the scope about the database, so understanding that they understand these technical concepts. What you talked about around the database scope sounds really promising. From my experience, this would also involve these things, so that even if they don't feel as comfortable with the technical things, they might be a little bit too embarrassed and just agree.
Thank you.
Cool. Did anybody else have anything? Cool. I won't make you sit awkwardly. I'll let you escape. Thank you very, very much for sitting in.